guess just Jordan, what have you seen maybe in the turnaround for Ole Miss these past 2 weeks, especially that Oklahoma game, but what they did in Fayetteville last weekend as well?
Yeah, I think they executed through the air, and I think what's important to understand is that Jackson Dart is a product of everything around him, right? I think Jackson has made huge strides in his career here at Ole Miss, and I think the offensive line started coming along a little bit more, protecting him up front. He wasn't under as much fire. And when you give Jackson Dart time, he can pick you apart with all the weapons that Ole Miss has on the outside. So I think that was the main difference, is protection-wise. There wasn't as much heat on Jackson. When he has time, he's as good as anybody.
So what do you think Ole Miss needs to do in order to possibly beat, Georgia? Because on ESPN Analytics, they're in favor of Ole Miss. Mm-hmm. So what do you think?
They got to run the football. I know it's going to be tough without Henry Parrish for sure. That's why I look at maybe Jackson needs to run the football a little bit more, because if you go back and watch Georgia in that Texas game, they were able to really dial up a lot of unique blitzes. And if they're able to not have to worry about the run game, and they're able to get in the mode where they can pin their ears back and get creative in their blitz game, they're going to create some problems for that offensive line of Jackson Dart. So they got to be able to run the football. It's going to be a little rainy too. So if they can get that going, soften things up on the back end, then they can get to those shot plays that I know they want to hit.
Jordan, you talk about Lane Kiffin, his career at Ole Miss, 41-17. He's winningest coach since Johnny Vaught. So winningest coach since Johnny Vaught from back in the day. So how big of a game is this for him? Because the big games have kind of eluded him a little bit at Ole Miss.
I think it's massive, right? 0-4 against the top five, I think is really – that's what we measure the top-tier coaches upon. And I think Lane Kiffin is a top-tier coach. He's going to have a chance to go out there and prove it. The problem is he's going up against a Georgia team that has won 52 straight versus anybody that's not Alabama. But then again, there's only so much a coach can do, right? You can put the plan together, you can get your team there, but the time the whistle blows, you got to have your guys execute out there. So that's where he's going to have to lean on Charlie Weiss Jr. and Jackson Dart executing the plays that are there for them against a really good defense. And I think this is a game that can really change maybe that perception of Lane Kiffin in the big games for sure.
How big of a game do you think this is for Carson Beck? He struggled a little bit last month or so.
Massive. It's like it's like sitting at a roulette table, right? And you look up at the board and you see red, and it just keeps going red. And you're like, man, eventually black's going to hit, right? And we see Carson Beck, it's like, man, interceptions. Eventually, though, he's going to have a game where he's not turning the ball over like that. He's going to have a game like the Carson Beck we're used to seeing. Ole Miss hopes it's not this game. I think it's massive for Carson Beck because he started the season as a guy that was a presumptive top 10, number 1 overall pick. I think he slipped a little bit in that. I think he's putting too much pressure on himself. So I talked about running the football. Georgia's got to run the football too, because when it's all on Carson Beck's shoulders, with the type of pass rush Ole Miss has, that's going to be a problem for him. So for them as well, if they can run the football, slow down the Ole Miss defensive front, not as much pressure is on Carson.
What have you seen in the addition of Princely and Walter to what Ivy and Big E's were already doing, but what this defensive line has changed into? Because that was kind of the flashpoint for Kiffin to change after that Georgia game last year.
No doubt. I mean, and look, Jared Ivey's always been a really good player, but when you have one guy that's good as a quarterback, I love that because then I can slide the protection. If I have to worry about one guy, I can make sure we take care of him. When you have 4 or 5 guys up front and some Taron Perkins as well that's really come along, that's a problem because you can't protect yourself as well. You have to trust guys to win one-on-ones, offensive linemen, to win one-on-ones to protect you. So that makes it difficult. And they're so good interior and exterior that's why you got to run the football. Like, you can't let those guys pin their ears back and come after you.
I know this isn't his focus right now, but for kind of us looking outside, this last month is probably big for Jackson in terms of thinking of the spring and the combine and the draft. What have you seen out of him from the start of SEC play to where he is entering tomorrow in terms of his game?
Yeah, I think it's decision making, and that's always what you're going to be judged upon as a quarterback, but I think it gets overlooked a lot. How quickly the ball's coming out of your hands, are you making the right decisions? And Jackson does so much in the run game as well to check things in the run game, check protections. So he's going to have to be really on his game because Georgia is one of those teams, as we saw against Texas, they move a lot pre-snap. They adjust things right before the snap. So Jackson may think he's right. He's going to have to be really good post-snap with his decision-making to see, okay, what did they do? How did they change? How'd they roll? Who's blitzing? Who's not? And make those quick decisions.
The SEC is a bit of a hodgepodge right now. It'll work itself out a lot tomorrow. But, you've been covering the league for a while now. Have you ever seen this much parity? And if you haven't, what do you think lends to that parity, in your opinion?
I haven't seen this much parity. I mean, Vandy's still got a shot to make the SEC championship. Come on now. I mean, it's crazy. Part of that, I think, is, look, there's no more divisions, right? So now everybody is in the open. Everybody has an equal chance. Like, some years the East was way down, but still one of those teams was going to get it, and West was kind of cannibalizing itself at times. So that's out the window. But I think the NIL landscape has really changed things, and not maybe for the splash guys, the high-level guys that we're thinking about, but it's the depth. So anytime you have an injury in this league now, those guys that were really good number twos are gone. They're starters on other rosters now. So now a Georgia or a Bama or an LSU, when their starter goes down, those number twos are on other rosters. Now they're playing true freshmen and guys that should probably be threes or fours. So I think that creates a lot of parity as well. It's really balanced out the talent, and it's really depleted the depth of, I think, the top-tier teams.
You've probably been asked this a lot the last month, but for you, what does it mean to see the turnaround that Vandy has been able to do?
I think it's awesome, right? I mean, I was really close with Clark at the beginning and talking to him about how we did it back in 11 and 12 with James Franklin, and it's not an easy job. He put his heart and soul into that, and I think he took the biggest risk and the biggest gamble on himself this year by taking back control of the defensive coordinator job and then completely handing over the offense to Beck, to Pavia, to Jerry Kill to go, hey, install this unique scheme, make it work. I'm going to worry about my side of the ball, and we're going to get it done. And I think they've done that. Diego Pavia, as kind of we did in 2011 and 12, you need a false sense of confidence in a way, right? Because if at Vandy, if you don't believe you can beat every team you line up against, you're never as talented. So you got no chance if you don't believe. And I think he's created a belief in that program that has paid big dividends.
Looking at the 12-team playoff, I know you saw the college football playoff numbers came out. How do you think the SEC kind of fared in the opening playoff poll, and how many do you think the SEC can get in there at the end of the year?
I don't think we fared great. I think the committee kind of showed that they're valuing how you lost more so than what you did and what games you won. But again, everything's going to sort itself out. We got a bunch of games this weekend. They're going to shake things up. But I think Indiana fared well, Penn State fared well, and I think that because the Big 12, I think, is only going to get in one, because the ACC now with Clemson losing is only going to get in one, I think there's going to be 4 spots for the Big 10 and the SEC, and I think 4 at-large spots. So I don't think the SEC is getting in more than 4, and I think 4 could be in jeopardy depending on how many 2-loss teams really have a legitimate chance versus some 1-loss teams that maybe didn't have as tough as a schedule.